Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to this week's podcast episode. I'm thrilled you're here. And before we dive into today's topic, which I cannot wait to share with you, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for sharing this podcast with your fellow independent consultants and other colleagues who are interested in this type of work. Thank you for leaving the most amazing ratings and reviews. Thank you for reaching out and letting me know when a particular episode has been impactful for you or it really resonated with you. And just simply thank you for listening and putting the work that I share with you into practice. I hear from so many of you that you are able to take what I share with you on a weekly basis, or the interviews that I do on a weekly basis, or the concepts I share, and put those into practice in your own business and really start to see how it moves the needle. So I just want to say thank you today, full of gratitude. So today's topic is the best approach to consulting contract negotiations. What a fun topic. Whenever I bring up the word negotiation, including for myself, it kind of creates that freeze response, right? Very few people in this world love negotiating. So this can really be a topic, a concept, a part of your business process that creates one of two dynamics. When you think about negotiations, what usually ends up happening as an independent consultant, and this may be happening for you, are one of two things. You either really just try to do everything in your power to avoid negotiating because it feels so uncomfortable and you feel bad at it probably, or you end up really rushing through the process and trying to just make it go away. So in either case, what can end up happening is just a business where you're running that either feels regretful, you've agreed to something that you wish you hadn't, or you question and self-doubt, wondering what kind of money you've left on the table. And so today I want to share with you what I believe to be and have seen in practice the best approach to consulting contract negotiations. And quite frankly, it may not be what you're expecting. So I'm excited to share this with you today so that you can really run a business where you feel solid, you feel grounded, you feel that you're winning, you feel that you don't have to go through the regret and the second guessing and questioning yourself all of the time. You can really get to the place with your business where you're creating a machine that generates new business that you feel really proud to execute against, where you feel, if not even more than fairly compensated, and where you know your clients are getting value. You don't have to have this regret engine going on in the background and second guessing. And this also applies to not just the contracts that you're negotiating with your consulting clients. What I'm going to share with you today can apply so effectively to contracts that you've got with other people, perhaps subcontractors, perhaps even vendors that you're working with. So thinking about this from referral partners, it applies to all different types of contracts. And so that's what I want to share with you today is the best approach to those consulting contract negotiations. So our agenda for today is 4 parts. Number 1, we're going to talk about, do you even need to negotiate consulting agreements? I think this is an important question to be asking yourself. Some of you are feeling like you have to, and so you're baking that into your process, perhaps unnecessarily, or you might be in the situation where you just avoid it at all costs and are potentially impacting your business negatively in that way. So let's talk first about, do you even need to negotiate consulting agreements? The second point here that I want to talk through with you is how to preempt negotiating. So that gives a little bit of an insight into, do you need to negotiate them? How do you preempt negotiating? And then the third thing we'll talk through is, what should you negotiate? So things you don't want to preempt. And then stay tuned to the end, because I want to share with you 2 resources that you can use very tangibly to put what I'm sharing in action. They're amazing resources, so don't miss that. Okay, before we get started, I want to remind you of the Independent Consultants Business Scaling Assessment. I've had many of you say, Melissa, I keep meaning to take this and I keep forgetting, or it's on my list, basically. So be sure to go do that this week. icscorecard.com. You answer 26 questions. It takes less than 5 minutes. And from there, you're able to get a very thorough report on where are the areas of your business in a prioritized fashion that you can be focusing on to set yourself up for growth, for sustainable growth, for predictable growth. This doesn't mean that you need to go hire anyone or bring on any bench or subs or anything. By scaling, I mean, let's help you to get to the place where you're making more income, more profitable projects in less time and less work, so that you can really enjoy the freedom that comes with running this type of business. Look, you're taking on a lot of responsibility as an independent consultant. Let's make sure that you're reaping the rewards of that, making more money, feeling more flexible, having more freedom. All right. So go over to icscorecard.com, answer those 26 questions, and you'll get that, a prioritized action plan for yourself. All right. So with that, let's talk about our topic of the week: negotiations, consulting agreement, and other contract negotiations. So let's just start off and level set. What is a negotiation? So I was like just thinking about this, because a lot of times we have these preconceived notions, right, when we think about something. So I was like just going very back to the basics. What is a negotiation? One of the definitions that you'll find is that negotiation is an interaction between entities who aspire to agree on matters of mutual interest. The agreement can be beneficial for all or some of the parties involved. That's kind of the textbook definition of a negotiation. So interactions between entities who aspire to agree on matters of mutual interest. The word negotiation is very loaded. Think about when you hear the word negotiating, what comes to your mind? Like very high stakes things, right? Hostage negotiation, like life or death, political negotiations. Think about political negotiations. There's basically a no-win outcome, no matter what your viewpoints are. Contract negotiations. When we think about those, a lot of times we think about what we see on the movies or things that we might have experienced in corporate that are really involved and require lawyers and all sorts of really high stakes, pressure-filled situations. And it really connotes like a lot of back and forth, a lot of like shuttle diplomacy in some ways, and a lot of ultimate compromise. None of these things feel good. These things all feel terrible. I don't know about you, unless you love negotiating and you're literally a consultant who teaches people to negotiate. Most of this probably feels bad to you. It makes you feel pressured or inadequate, right? I'm thinking things like I'm terrible at negotiating, or, it's not something that is part of my skill set. And so, of course, when you think about your business development process and you think about the proposal and contracting stages specifically, when you think about that and giving someone, a potential client, a proposal, of course, if you feel like you're going to have to enter into some kind of negotiation in some way, it makes you feel probably horrible. And so, of course, from that perspective, if you feel like they're going to push back on you, or they're going to ask you for concessions, or they're going to ask you for you to change something or reduce the price, whatever it is, of course, you're going to want to avoid providing that proposal. Of course, you're going to want to avoid discussing the terms and conditions. Of course, you're going to procrastinate. Of course, you're going to eventually send that thing over and just want to get the process of getting to a signed statement of work over as quickly as possible so that you can start work and not have to deal with this thing that feels uncomfortable. So what I want to share with you first is really just recognizing that, because what I find, even if you don't think about negotiation in a literal sense in your business development process, what I find is this kind of freezing phenomenon occurs with so many consultants because we just don't want to get into that awkward phase. Whether you call it negotiating or you call it something else, proposal review, whatever you end up calling it, it doesn't really matter. It's much more about having to get into that phase where you're talking nuts and bolts and getting the client over the finish line so that you can have a signed agreement and start working with them, delivering it and getting paid. That phase of the process for most of us as independent consultants feels really horrible, feels like we're not as good at it or terrible at it, depending on your perspective. And of course, you're going to want to avoid it because of that. And so today, I want to really walk you through a process so that you don't have to feel uncomfortable about this anymore and get really clear for yourself about what it looks like to get to the phase of a project, of a business proposal where you're coming to agreement on terms and moving forward, and take the pressure out of the process. That's what we're here for today. All right. So let's first start with, do you even need to negotiate? I think is such an important question. And for some of us, we don't think about our business development process as something that we're negotiating. So you may or may not say this exact word to yourself, but when you think about proposing something and getting to an agreement, this is the area where I want to really challenge you to say, is this something that needs to happen at the very end of your business development process? Should there be a lot of back and forth about what the terms and conditions are? Common thinking may lead you to believe that the client, the end client, wouldn't want to negotiate, and that you might need to negotiate. Like I hear from people a lot of times, from independent consultants, a lot of times, who say to me, well, business people negotiate, so I should definitely be negotiating so I don't leave money off the table. So think about it from your perspective. Do you think you need to negotiate or do some kind of back and forth with a client, whatever you call it? And then similarly, do you think your client feels the need to negotiate in order to somehow check the box on their internal process? Sometimes we think automatically negotiation needs to happen at the end of a contracting process. And what I'm here to say to you today is this should be the exception, not the rule, that you would need to quote unquote negotiate on a final statement of work. Here's where it's more common. It's more common to negotiate on things that are time-based, like negotiate on the rate, an hourly rate or a daily rate or something like that. The other time that it's more common to negotiate is if your buyer or stakeholder is procurement. Like that's in their DNA. They feel like they are not doing their job most of the time. I'll generalize here if they don't negotiate. A lot of times they are measured internally on what amount of cost savings they created by negotiating. So let's put those two scenarios aside for a moment, and we'll come back to them in a few minutes. But for the most part, if you execute your business development process in a collaborative way, you won't need to negotiate at the end. So let me tell you more about what I mean by that. If you're getting upfront buy-in as you go through the business development process, from first conversation all the way through to a proposal, and the proposal is treated more of a check the box than of a tool to get alignment, then you're not really negotiating at all. What you're actually doing instead of negotiating is really aligning, right? If you do this in a way that you're aligning from the very first step and co-creating from the very first conversation all the way through to getting verbal agreement on what the approach is, then when you put a proposal in place, it's more of a check the box in the sense of you've written down everything that you've agreed to, and there's no negotiation needed. So, what that might look like is really getting yourself to the place where you're asking questions and getting alignment and understanding what that potential clients, what they value, and how they would quantify the impact of the work that you're doing, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And getting all of that really in depth conversation going throughout the process that you've got, so that when you write it up in a proposal, at most you've got a couple of options that you're providing to them, things that they've already really contributed to, co-developed with you, and then it just gives them the ability to decide, do I want to go with option A or option B, and move forward. There's no negotiation needed because you're taking the negotiation, you're not using that proposal as a tool for you to drive a conversation about what it is that the client wants. You're using the proposal as a formality and instead moving the conversation up front loading it so that you're co-creating, collaborating, and creating an approach that both of you have contributed to. And so there's no need to negotiate. Hopefully, this is really resonating with you. In some ways, you're probably doing this already. And today, I'm challenging you to front load it even more. So oftentimes, I work with clients and ask them, they give me a proposal and say, Melissa, can you read this proposal for me and give me feedback? And when I start asking them questions about what went into the proposal, what they know about why the client wants to do this project, I mean, truly why. Not because, quote unquote, it needs to get done or they don't have anyone internally to do the work, but the true reason why. What is the business reason behind why they're doing the work? And what is the value that that client attaches to doing the work? And what is the impact monetarily and intangibly of not doing the work? When I start asking those questions as I review proposals, a lot of times my consulting business owner clients don't know all of the answers that they wish they knew the answers to. They haven't really gone into those in-depth conversations up front. And so then they're trying to use the proposal as a vehicle to get that type of alignment, and then potentially setting themselves up for some form of negotiation on their rates, on their fees, on the pricing structures they put in place. Versus what we start working on is really getting to the place where you're able to ask those high quality questions up front, get really meaningful dialogue and understanding about why they want to do this work, why it's important, what the business impacts are, how the client would value the results, the work that you do is creating, and then moving forward from there and using the proposal as like I said, just a final confirmation of all of that dialogue that you've had. Okay, so really the answer today of what is the best way to negotiate a consulting contract is two things. Number one, not thinking about it as a negotiation. It's more of an alignment or a collaboration. And number two, really getting to the place where you're gaining buy-in and co-developing a proposal, co-developing an approach that you're preempting the need for negotiation at all. All right. So it's really important to look at in terms of your business development process. And then from there, I'm not telling you just don't negotiate anything. There are times where you want to negotiate. So for example, you might want to negotiate if you're still doing time-based rates. There's no shame in that. You're still doing hourly rates or daily rates. It's not a problem. You may want to revisit your business model over time, but you may also get to the place where right now in your business, for example, you might be gaining work from marketplaces like Catalent or something like the MBO Partners, one of those. And you may be in a position where you need to negotiate the rates, or you may be in a position where you're invoicing or creating structures with your end clients that are more value-based or project-based, and you're negotiating rates with subcontractors. In whatever case you are in, there are times in your business where you're going to need to quote unquote negotiate. So I want to walk you through a 4-step process here of really getting to the place where this is not a problem, where you don't have to freeze or panic or feel inadequate when you get to this spot in your business. So the first step of this process is for you to diffuse the word negotiating, right? Like I was saying before, most of us think of the word negotiating, some horrible scene in our mind starts playing out like a hostage negotiation, right? Like that's just not setting you up for success when you start thinking about like, I've got to go into a negotiation or this call is going to be about negotiating our rates. It creates that freeze response or flight response in your nervous system. So instead, think about it from the perspective of a couple of things. You're just aligning, right? You're aligning whatever word it is that you need to use to basically take down the pressure and get yourself into more of a curiosity state than a panic or tense state. And then really recognize that there's no win or lose here. A lot of times, some of us, we think like, okay, I'm going into negotiation. One of the undercurrents there is that I need to win. I need to come out on top. And for a lot of us, we have a competitive spirit. I know I do. I know if you're listening, you probably do too. This isn't about winning or losing. So the first step of this, when you do need to go into negotiations in terms of best practices, is really to diffuse that term negotiation in the first place, because it's just not setting yourself up for success when you think, I've got to go into a negotiation or I've got to go negotiate this contract. So choose a term or a concept that really takes down the level of intensity a few notches for yourself. And then do some mental prep around this. I like to use the word getting quote unquote clean, like you're mentally clean as you're going into a process. And getting mentally clean is a lot of the work that I do with my clients, my consulting business owner clients, to help them get to the place where your mindset, your mental models are so much more effective than what they might be just working off of autopilot. So by clean, I'll give you a few strategies here. What I mean is really looking at three things: the thoughts about you, things like going into a conversation where you're agreeing to terms and conditions. If you go in thinking, I'm terrible at this, I hate this, this is horrible, this is not something that I was born to do, like those kinds of thoughts, of course, you're going to go in with a less than effective approach. And you think instead things like, I'm getting better at this, I'm learning how to navigate this, I do this every day when I'm delivering to consulting work to clients, this is just a different scenario, then it can really lighten up that pressure that you've been putting on yourself. Similarly, you want to think about thoughts about them. Think about the different way you would show up if you went into a conversation with someone where you're negotiating, or whatever word you want to use, those terms and conditions. When you think, well, they're just going to try to get as much from me as they can, versus I know that they're interested in a mutually beneficial solution, think about the different approach you would take from one of those thoughts, which is they're taking as much as they can from me, versus I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they want a mutually beneficial solution. It's a completely different approach you would have. So you want to get really clean on your thoughts about them, your thoughts about you, and your thoughts about the process. So I just walked you through a few examples of how to do that. And then also one trap that I notice a lot of clients falling into is feeling rushed. Like, I just need to get this contract signed so that we can start the work and get going. The client's getting frustrated that this is taking so long, and those types of thoughts. One of the mental models that I want to share with you is, what if you started thinking about this as the work has actually starts with the first conversation? You're helping that client to get clear. You're helping that client to get more aligned on what it is they want the outcomes to be. And even though you might not be getting paid in that moment for your business development work, you're creating value for them from the beginning. So rushing yourself through a process and therefore skipping some of this alignment work is not going to serve you. And then finally, as a process for times where you do feel like you need to negotiate, ask yourself some really high quality questions. What are the things that I'm truly going to walk away from? And don't write down something that you don't really mean. Be honest with yourself. Like, what is it that if this happens, this is not a good project for me or a good situation for me? The 4 categories here: walk away, good, better, best. And just really thinking through what that might look like. Ask yourself, a lot of times we forget this very simple thing. What does my stakeholder truly care about and why? thinking about it from a big picture perspective versus specific terms and conditions can really help. Like, what is the big picture here so that you can unlock some creativity? And along the same lines, what options could I provide to them that might be an alternative? Maybe we're kind of locking horns on a certain thing. What if we just offered something completely different, a different option to get to the same result? So really thinking about it in advance, whatever the conversation might be, where you need to come to final agreement on how to move forward, these 4 concepts can be really valuable for you to get into a productive, effective, less pressure-filled mindset. So that's really important. If I were to recap what we talked about today, and then I'll share those 2 resources with you. The first thing is really thinking about your business development process and setting it up in such a way that negotiation isn't really even part of the process at all, because you're creating alignment as you go through each step of your business development process and treating the proposal as a formality to encapsulate everything you've already agreed to, and perhaps giving them a couple of options that they've bought into and helps them to finalize whatever their decision is and move forward. So that's the first thing. And then in the times where you do need to negotiate some form of terms and conditions, situations like hourly or daily rates, or where you're working with your own subcontractors who you're paying hourly or daily, or other service providers, really getting yourself to the place where you are quote unquote clean about what you're doing in that conversation and taking down the pressure so that you can really think creatively and show up in a way that you already know how to do because you are a consultant. This is what you do every single day, is help people get to agreements and move forward in some way. You just aren't maybe labeling them negotiating. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully that's really helpful for you to continue refining your business development process and starting to take a lot of the fear and avoidance out of it that I hear you struggling with on a daily basis when you're working in your business. Sorry, working on your business, not in your business. So with that, let me share with you these 2 resources that are really valuable. The first is a book that's called Never Split the Difference. You may have read it. It's by Chris Voss. He's actually, I think, a former FBI hostage negotiator. So super helpful. I think the stories that he shares in the book are really valuable, but what I really love the most is the appendix. There's a prepare a negotiation 1 sheet. So really, really helpful if you do nothing, but if you never even read the book, that part of the, I'm just looking at it right now as I'm talking with you. I personally find that so valuable. That appendix alone is worth buying that book. And then the other resource that I want to share with you is a blog post that I wrote for this purpose. It's called How Independent Consultants' Rates and Retainer Fees Work. So it's on my blog. You can go to melissalieberman.com resources and you'll see the blog there. We'll put the link in the show notes as well. But it's really a comprehensive blog post about all things rates and retainer fees and value-based pricing and negotiating. So you'll want to go read that blog and you can see what we've talked about today, but so much more about pricing strategies in your business. So with that, thank you for tuning in today, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.